Hi, I'm Kristin Omdahl, back at the Create, Share, Inspire podcast. Oh, it's a crazy night at the beach, but we'll see a beautiful sunset, even though it's crazy down here. If you're joining me live, please say hello. I'll wait a few seconds before beginning to wait for people to pop over from the live chat room or to get notifications. It'll take a few minutes. So we'll just wait a few minutes for everybody to join. Here we go. Pranjit is the first one here. Hello, good evening. Hi, Judy. Good evening. Welcome back to Create, Share, Inspire podcast. We're here live in Southwest Florida, and it is beginning of the sunset, which I thought you all might enjoy. Hi, Glory and Anna, Lynn, Jill, Shelly, Christine, Martha, Lisa. The sun is reflecting on my screen, so hi Christine. So not sure how well I'm going to see comments tonight, but I'm definitely going to try. Hi Judy, thanks for joining live. Thank you all for joining me live. Hi Melanie. Didn't know if the weather was going to participate with us tonight, but the last minute it looked like it was going to stay clear, so yay! Yes, it is beautiful, Pranjit. Hi, Sherry, Mary Kay. My screen is super dark. Let's see if I turn it a little bit, if that'll help. Not sure. Try. Hi, Melody and Cherie and Kim. Thanks for joining live. All right. Hi, Lynn. Well, welcome back to Create, Share, Inspire podcast. This is episode 444, and we're here live in Southwest Florida, waiting on the sun to set in the west over the beautiful Gulf of Mexico. It's a little breezy down here, which is helping with the humidity and the heat. And it is definitely sunny and beautiful. A little windy, like I said, but the wind brings the waves. So hopefully you can hear that beautiful melody of the waves crashing in the background. If you're joining me live, please say hello to everybody. If you end up watching the recorded podcast, which most people do, that's okay too. Please feel welcome to leave comments, say hello, or if you have any questions, please leave them for me there. I'm happy to answer you if I can. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, this is another dress from my Amazon shop. Remember the one that I wore last week that has like a teal and floral print to it? This one is a solid color of the same dress. It feels a little tighter, so I would like to check and see if I bought this one in a medium by mistake, or if the solid colors are a little more snug, so I'll have to get back to you on that tomorrow. But otherwise, it's a faux wrap, and I do love the faux wrap style on me because I am curvy. It helps me to accentuate my waist separate from my other curves. So if you have a curvy body style, I know you probably like this style of dress too. And you can find it in my Amazon shop. There's a link in the video description below. I have a quick show and tell to start with. Thanks, Jane. Thank you. I love this dress. I have mostly finished the short sleeve version of the Summer Lovin' vest, and I will try it on so you can see. I have not done the ties. I have not done the sleeves. I'm probably going to release it separately for sleeves so you can see it both ways. And the pattern is not written or sized yet, but the charts are done, so I'm definitely on my way. But I thought I'd give you a quick sneak peek of what the updated version of the Summer Lovin' vest looks like. And I'll stand up so you can see both front to back, so I'll have to do it on my knees. So this is not blocked yet, so keep in mind the shape will change a little bit in the blocking. It's also extremely windy down here tonight, so that's not helping either. And I am going to put some sort of closure on the front, probably a tie, a tassel tie with some beads and tassels on it. But it's going to stay pretty simple, and I am going to eventually add sleeves, but I'll probably finish the pattern and upload photos of it this way first, and then add sleeves and add photos the second way. It makes more sense than making a whole separate garment to do it that way. So just a quick update that I am still working on the updated Summer Lovin' vest. It is not done yet, but just giving you a sneak peek of behind the scenes of what I'm working on. So I brought some yarn and a knitting needle tonight, and I wanted to talk to you about a really fun cast on and bind off that is a continuation from the knit cast on and bind off that we talked about last week that is incredibly stretchy. Well, there is a picot bind off and cast on that is even more stretchy than the traditional knit cast on. It uses knit cast on but also incorporates picots in it. And what I'm going to show you, and it may take more than one podcast to do so, I'm going to show you how to add the picots to the cast on, add picots to the side edges of your piece, and then how to do the picot bind off. So ultimately, whatever size square you make, whether it's for a dishcloth, a baby blanket, a scarf, a shawl, a full-size afghan, doesn't matter. I'm going to show you how with any stitch pattern you can add a picot edging to all four sides of your piece. And then, after we do that, I can show you how to do this in crochet as well. So we're just going to start with knitting however long it takes to show the cast on, the picots along the sides, and the bind off for a small piece is how long it will take. And then we'll do the same exact thing in crochet once we finish with this. And like I said, it's going to take more than one podcast, but that's okay. So, and if you want to see a tutorial for the picot cast on or the picot bind off in knitting, you can find those in my Knit Stitch library, which is available in the playlist here on my YouTube channel, and it's also available on a full page on my website called the How to Knit page. So to start with a knit cast on or a picot cast on, we're going to start with a slip knot on our needle first, and that counts as our first stitch. This might be challenging in the wind tonight. And then we'll knit 2 stitches. So we knit cast on 2 stitches for a total of 3. And now we're going to bind off those 3 stitches. So we'll knit 2 to bind off 1. And then we'll knit the 3rd stitch to bind off it. And now we'll take that live stitch again, move it back to our left hand, and knit cast on 6 stitches this time. Okay, so now we've got 6 stitches, and now we're going to bind off 3 stitches. Knit 2 to bind off 1, knit 1 to bind off 2, and knit 1 more to bind off 3. And now we'll slide that stitch over to our left hand needle, and now we have a total of 4 stitches cast on and 2 picots done on our left hand needle. So now we're going to knit cast on 6 more stitches. And if you need a close-up or slow motion of this stitch, just go watch the tutorial video in my Knit Stitch library on YouTube or on my How to Knit page on my website, and you can get the close-up on how to do this knit cast on. Like we've talked about before, the tutorials on the podcast aren't as detailed as the tutorials that are proper stitch tutorials, but you do get a lot of information on how to use them. 1, 2, 3, okay, I did 7, so I'll move 1 down. Okay, so now we knit cast on 6, and we will bind off 3. And remember, when you're binding off in the middle of a row, the words that I like to use are knit 2 to bind off 1, knit 1 to bind off 2, and knit 1 to bind off 3. And then we'll move that stitch back to the left hand needle. So now you can start to see our repeat. Our repeat going forward is going to be knit cast on 6 and bind off 3. And what it's going to give us is this beautiful scalloped or picot edge cast on. So I'm going to continue working knit cast on 6. This is beautiful for the edge of a scarf, the edge of a shawl, the edge of a blanket, the edge of a dishcloth. Doesn't really matter. Anything with a straight edge, this is a beautiful edging. And then you've done your edging, you don't have to do something after the fact. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, perfect. So now we're going to bind off 3 for our next picot. And after a couple more here, we'll start moving on to our rows where I'll be able to show you how to work the picots at the end of the rows as well, so that we can continue on with this beautiful edging along the sides of our piece too. So I'll be showing you how to add the picots to the lower edge in the cast on, how to add them every few rows on the sides, and then how to add them in the bind off so that you have picots along all 4 sides. Okay, and so you start it with knit cast on 3, bind off 3, and then the rest of the repeat is knit cast on 6, bind off 3. And so you'll be adding a multiple of 3 plus 1 for your project. 3, 4, 5. Be a beautiful baby blanket if you just wanted to do it in garter stitch or some other really simple stitch pattern, because then it would just be a simple stitch and that beautiful edging. So we did knit cast on 6, so we'll now bind off 3, knit 2, to bind off 1, knit 1, to bind off 2, and knit 1, to bind off 3. Alright, I'm going to see how many stitches I have on here. This might be sufficient. Yeah, we've got 5 picots, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've got 13 stitches. Let's go ahead and just work across. I know some of you are probably impatient to get going and see the next part. And those of you that crochet and don't knit are even more impatient because you're waiting for the crochet version of it. And that may not be tonight, but we'll certainly get to it when we get through the knit one. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is add picots every 4 rows by adding them at the beginning of every, so we're going to knit 2 rows straight, or maybe let's knit 4 rows straight, and then it'll be on rows 5 and 6 that we add a picot at the beginning of the row. So we'll knit 2, and then 2 more rows, and then I'll show you how we add the picots at the beginning of each of the next 2 rows, which will give us a picot on each side of our vertical edges of the square. And keep in mind, it doesn't matter how big you make this square or if you make it a rectangle. So this could be a dishcloth, a baby blanket, a scarf, a shawl, a big afghan, it doesn't matter, and it can be any stitch in the middle, and you'll have this beautiful picot edging around all 4 sides of your square or rectangle without having to add an edging at the end, which is just fantastic. I'll write this up as a blog post when we're done with it, and then hopefully it'll help you understand that you can design any type of simple project like that with any stitch pattern and add this as your edging design element. Okay, so we've done our 4 rows, so I'm doing a 6-row repeat, doing 4 rows just plain even, and now I'm going to add a picot at the edge of each of the next rows. So how I'm going to do that is to knit cast on 3 stitches, then bind off those 3 stitches, so knit 2 to bind off 1, knit 1 to bind off 2, knit 1 to bind off 3, and now want to remember that that stitch that's remaining on our right hand needle is actually the first stitch of our row. So then we'll knit across the whole row. Okay, and now we're at the end of that row, which is the beginning of the next row. So we'll do the same thing again. We'll knit cast on 3, knit cast on 3, and then bind off those 3 stitches. Can't see comments at all tonight. It's way too dark because it's so bright out here. I'll try to come closer and see if I can read anything, but I have a feeling that sunset's just not going to be the time to be able to read comments. So if you're asking me a question and your question is important, please remember to consider writing your question in the podcast when it goes from live to recorded, because then I'll have an opportunity to read it later. But look at this! We've got picots along the sides of our rows now, and I think once I do the second repeat, it'll start to really make a lot more sense. So I'm going to move my arms down now, because honestly, holding them up like that was like a huge workout. So I'm just going to quickly knit 4 rows down in my lap, and then I'll lift it back up when I do the next 2 picot rows. I'm going to try to read the comments while I do this, because working straight knitting rows, well, if you don't knit yet, maybe you could learn. This is not difficult to do, and if it doesn't appeal to you at all, that's fine as well. I know lots of people here do knit and will probably appreciate this technique. Thank you, Novella. I'm glad you like it. So I'm knitting 4 straight rows, so really no reason to keep my arms up in the air for this. I'm just knitting 4 straight rows, and as soon as I finish those 4 straight rows, I will lift the swatch up again. Yeah, you can definitely learn to knit. All of us that knit started the same way you will, just like all of us started to crochet the same way. We started by working our first stitches, right? I happened to learn how to knit and crochet it was within my first month of both. So I learned them both at the same time, but I had to crochet my first stitch just the same as everybody else has to crochet their first stitch, and same with knitting. Everybody casts on the same way the first time, with excitement and fear and a little of the unknown. Okay, so I've done 4 more even rows, so now I can do 2 more of my picot edge rows. So I'm going to knit cast on 3 stitches. And those 2 resources that I talked about tonight are a fantastic place to begin if you're interested in learning how to knit. Okay, so we knit cast on 3, and then we'll bind off 2, or knit 2 to bind off 1, knit 1 to bind off 2, and knit 1 to bind off 3. So we bound off those 3 stitches that we knit cast on. So now the remaining stitch in our right hand needle is the first stitch of our existing stitches along the middle of the row, are our live stitches. So we'll work across this row. And keep in mind, however frequently you want your picots to edge the sides of your rows, you could alternate how many rows you want plain between how many rows you want with the picot on them as well. I decided to do 4 rows plain and a picot at the beginning of each of the next 2 rows. You could do it every 8 rows, every 10, every 2. It doesn't matter. You could do it anyway. That would be a design choice of yours. So we're going to knit cast on 3 stitches at the edge of the beginning of the next row now. Knit cast on 3, bind off 3, so we knit 2 to bind off 1, knit 2, knit to bind off 2, and knit 3 to bind off 3. The stitch on the right hand needle is the first stitch of our live center stitches, so we will continue on and finish this row. And when we do, I'll show you how really beautiful these picots are looking. This would make an absolutely beautiful scarf or a shawl. You could use any stitch pattern you like in the middle. It could be a simple stitch pattern like I'm using, like the garter stitch, or it could be a complicated lace or texture stitch pattern. It doesn't matter. The picots would work on anything. They don't have anything to do with the stitch pattern you're doing in the middle. So how great is this? So we've got picots going along our sides, and we've got picots going along the bottom. Does anybody have any questions specific to the picot? And I'm going to keep knitting while I look. Sandshell wants to try it. Wonderful. Dee Dee says it's beautiful. Wonderful. Gail thinks it's beautiful. Wonderful. What would you like to make with it? What do you think that you would make with it? Would you make a dishcloth to start with? Would you make a simple baby blanket? Would you, thanks Nancy, would you make a scarf? You could do a scarf lengthwise or widthwise. You could start with the skinny edge and work your way up, or you could start with the long edge and work your way up. You could do it either way, and you could do, Cranchi loves it too, wonderful. You could also do a shawl in either direction. It could be, Sandshell says she'll try a dishcloth. That's a good idea, because then you can get a feel for it before you, and you can get a feel for it in maybe a thicker yarn. If you want to end up doing something lacier or fancier with thinner yarns, it might be a good place to start with a thicker yarn for a dishcloth. And small project to start with. I agree. Okay, I did 2 of my even rows. I'm going to do 2 more evens. A shawl would be really nice, Luna. You could also do a shawl in a triangle shawl too. You could do a triangle shawl where you started with the top edge and did your picot cast on for the whole length, and then as you decrease down, you could add picots to every 6th or 8th. What yarn am I using? I am using Biso baby yarn in colorway Splash right now. Yeah, start with a dishcloth. That's a great idea. Or a swatch of any kind, a washcloth. Okay, I think that was 3, so we'll do 1 more. I made some progress on the new issue of the Create, Share, Inspire notebook today. I think I'm pretty close to finishing the first draft of issue 6, so I'm pretty excited about that, which means I will be contacting my editors very soon to have them take a look at issue 6. Pretty excited about that. I should be there in the next couple of days. Should be sending it off to them. Okay, so you can, now that we've got a little more space, you can even see those picots a little bit better. I might have gone too many rows. Let's see. I think I added too many rows. I'm going to back it out. Want to see how I back it out? Whoop. Now, like I've showed you before, sometimes it's easier to do this if you grab a skinnier needle than the needle you used in order to get those stitches back on your needle. But I'm going to risk it and just try to pop them all back on. Okay, so it makes it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Hey, I've got my 13. Okay, so now, I think someone asked if you could put a bead in there. Sure you could. You could put a bead in there too. You know what? Lydia says I'm brave. It just comes from lots of experience, that's all. Everybody appears more brave when they have more experience. It actually doesn't make you brave, it just makes you look brave. There are ways to be brave, but this is one example of just experience giving me the confidence to know what I'm doing. Okay, so we're ready to do our next 2 rows of picot. So we're going to knit cast on 3. And it looks like we'll have just enough time to do this, and then tomorrow we'll do the picot bind off. And you'll see how it perfectly matches the picot cast on the other side. Which makes this such an amazing perimeter edging that is so easy to do. I mean, you don't have to, there's no afterthought, there's no adding something on at the end, there's no figuring out your multiple, nothing. You just, it's part of the actual piece you're making. So nothing extra to do at the end, nothing extra to sew on or anything, just part of the original piece. I love that. And I'm going to be able to show you how to do this exactly the same, well, not exactly the same way. I'm going to be able to show you how to get the exact same look in crochet, which I know I talk about often, that it's not every day that a technique can look almost identical in both crafts. And this one, I think doing picots, it looks pretty darn similar in both, so I'm excited to show you that as well. So that'll either be tomorrow or the next day. So we'll knit cast on 3, bind off 3, and we bind off 3 by knitting 2 to bind off 1, knitting 1 to bind off 2, and knitting 1 more to bind off 3. Then remember that the stitch remaining on our right hand needle is actually borrowed from the live stitches in the middle. So that's something, the reason I say it like that is because if you were doing a stitch pattern, not something like this where it's just knit every stitch. If you're doing a stitch pattern, you have to consider that that would be the first knit 1 of your stitch pattern. So it's really important to remember where you are in your work when you're binding off stitches in the middle of a row. Okay. So there we go. We've got 3 sets of picots along each side of our square that replicate the picots along the cast on edge on the bottom. So you see we've begun a really amazing perimeter of edging all matches. And then once we do the picot bind off, we'll have an edging around all 4 sides that would be beautiful as a baby blanket, a dishcloth, a washcloth, a scarf, a shawl, a blanket, really just about anything. And it can be done on absolutely any stitch pattern. So many different ways you can just add this tidy, fancy detail to absolutely anything that you're making. Really cool. And if you need help with the picot stitch or the picot cast on or bind off, please watch the specific videos about those in my Knit Stitch Library playlist here on YouTube or on my How to Knit page on my website. Both links are in the video description. And now, somebody would like to pick a number between 1 and 5. I can randomly pick a quote out of one of our issues. Carol says 5. Here's issue 5. Let's randomly pick a quote. Oh, so not only am I putting the books together, but I'm also drawing the next design for the books too. So the Create, Share, Inspire notebooks not only have a place to write in every day and an inspirational quote to inspire you every day, but I also put an oval of drawings on each page so that you have a place to color and draw and doodle and to just really still your mind while you're getting ready to write. Okay. Ooh, this one's pretty. This is by Thomas Brown. Life is a pure flame, and we live by an invisible sun within us. Yes, we have a fire in our belly, don't we? Sometimes we forget about it, and it just means we need reminding to know that the fire begins inside our belly, inside of us. And once we connect to that fire or energy inside us, there is no stopping us. We have everything in our palm of our hands, and we can do anything that we want. I love this one. This is by Thomas Brown. Life is a pure flame. Life is a pure flame, and we live by an invisible sun within us. Yes, our energy comes from within, and it's just so important that we find a way to tap into that energy. For some of us, it's with meditation. For some of us, it's with journaling. For some of us, it's with exercise. For some of us, it's with stilling our mind through knitting and crochet. It doesn't matter what your activity is that stills your mind and gets you connected to your internal flame or internal energy. However it works for you is important. and it gets you to that place where you can be the most you can be. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy evening to spend a few minutes here with me. I hope you enjoyed the sunset, the active beach, my tutorial, my show and tell, chatting with me and everyone else here. Let us make time to create, share, and inspire today and every day. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye.